You don't remember the first scream? Not really, because TLC buried it under music, confessionals, and clever editing. But it happened, and once you notice it, you realize something terrifying. The biggest fights in 90 Day Fiancé history were never just about jealousy or money or culture. They were about power, about control, about two people realizing, in real time, that love might have been a lie from the start. I know what you're thinking. Reality TV fights are fake. They exaggerate everything. That's what I thought too. But listen to this. Every couple I'm about to talk about started the same way. Smiling photos, airport hugs, promises whispered into a phone at 3 in the morning. And then something shifted, quietly at first. A tone change, a look, a pause where there shouldn't have been one. And by the time the cameras caught up, it was already too late. Let's start with the fight that made viewers physically uncomfortable. The one people still argue about years later, because nobody agrees on who crossed the line first. It began as a joke, a laugh, a comment that was supposed to be harmless. But when Colt and Larissa argued, it never stayed small. It couldn't, because their entire relationship was built on imbalance. Colt had the money, the green card, the house, and most importantly, his mother's loyalty. Larissa had nothing except hope and a plane ticket she couldn't afford to replace. Every argument carried that weight, even when they pretended it didn't. You could see it in the way she spoke faster when she got nervous. You could hear it in the way Colt stayed calm, almost too calm, while she spiraled. And that's what terrified people. Because when Larissa yelled, she was called unstable. When Colt stayed quiet, he was called mature. But what viewers didn't fully see was how silence can be a weapon too. That night, the fight escalated off camera first. Phones were slammed down, doors closed harder than necessary. And then suddenly, the police lights. Again, and again, and again. Each time, the internet split itself in half. Half of Twitter believed Larissa was being provoked and pushed past her breaking point. The other half believed Colt was being emotionally abused and trapped in his own home. Reddit threads ran for thousands of comments. People replayed scenes frame by frame, trying to find the moment where everything turned. But here's the part nobody was ready for. Even after the arrests, even after the screaming matches aired, TLC still didn't show the most damaging fight. The one that happened when the cameras were down. When no producer was there to step in. When it was just two people realizing they had married a stranger for completely different reasons. Larissa later hinted that the worst arguments were never filmed. Colt insisted the cameras captured everything. So which one was telling the truth? And why did both of them seem terrified of what might come out next? Then there was Anfisa and Jorge. And this one still makes people uncomfortable to talk about, because the truth sits in an ugly gray area nobody wants to claim. From the outside, the fight everyone remembers is obvious. The screaming, the insults, the infamous phone smashing, Anfisa screaming that she didn't love Jorge, she loved his money. Jorge looking humiliated, small, exposed. Viewers recoiled. Sponsors dropped her. Comment sections turned vicious overnight. But slow down. Rewatch the early episodes. Jorge promised her a lifestyle he couldn't actually afford. He exaggerated his income. He lied about his savings. He sold her a dream that never existed. And when she landed in America and realized the fantasy was fake, the mask came off. That's when the fighting began. The biggest blowout happened after she discovered he was broke. Not tight on money, broke. Not temporary setback, broke. Completely broke. And that argument wasn't really about love. It was about betrayal, about consent, about whether someone has the right to be angry when they realize the entire foundation of their relationship was built on a lie. TikTok wasn't around yet, but Facebook groups exploded. People wrote essays defending Jorge. Others defended Anfisa, saying honesty matters more than politeness. And here's the twist that changed how some fans saw everything. When Jorge later went to prison, Anfisa didn't celebrate. She didn't exploit it. She quietly moved on, rebuilt her life, and stopped talking about him almost entirely. So who was the villain? The woman who said the quiet part out loud? Or the man who lied and hoped love would cover it up? And then there's Angela and Michael. The fight that never really ended. Because with Angela, every argument felt like a ticking bomb. You could feel it coming. The raised voice, the finger pointing, the way Michael would shrink back, apologize, agree, promise to do better, even when he didn't fully understand what he was apologizing for. Their biggest fight wasn't about cheating rumors or Instagram comments. It was about control. Angela held the visa over Michael like a loaded gun. Every disagreement came with the unspoken threat, "I can send you home." And the cameras caught enough of it that viewers started to feel sick watching. Twitter lit up with people asking the same question: if the genders were reversed, would this still be treated as entertainment? Would TLC still be playing upbeat music over scenes that looked a lot like emotional abuse? But here's where it gets darker. Behind the scenes, producers reportedly had to step in more than once. Not for drama, for safety. And when Michael finally pushed back, just slightly, just enough to say he deserved respect, that's when Angela exploded in a way that made even longtime fans uncomfortable. And that's when the internet turned. Clips went viral, not for humor, for concern. Comment sections filled with people saying they couldn't watch anymore. Others defended Angela, saying Michael knew what he signed up for. And that's the question that keeps hanging in the air. Did he, or did he agree to love someone who slowly changed the rules? This is where everything quietly fell apart. Because once viewers started seeing the pattern, they couldn't unsee it. The biggest fights weren't random. They followed the same emotional blueprint. One person had leverage, money, citizenship, fame. The other had hope. And when hope starts turning into fear, that's when the screaming begins. Remember Nicole and Arzan? The fight people still quote because it sounded almost absurd on the surface. Almost there, lazy. People laughed. Memes were born. But that fight wasn't funny. It was heartbreaking. Nicole was chasing a fantasy. Arzan was chasing an exit strategy. And every argument was a negotiation neither of them wanted to admit they were having. He withheld affection. She withheld money. They both pretended it was love. When the biggest fight aired, the one where Arzan refused to show physical affection and Nicole broke down crying, viewers were split. Some called her desperate, others called him cold, but the truth sat in the middle. Two people using each other in different ways, both afraid to admit it because once you say it out loud, the relationship dies. Reddit threads still argue about whether Arzan ever loved her. Instagram comments accuse Nicole of ignoring every red flag. But here's the layer TLC never really explored: the shame. The shame of realizing you've invested years, money, and your entire identity into someone who may never choose you. And that shame turns into anger. Fast. Then there was Pedro and Chantel. And this fight didn't belong to just them. It belonged to their families, their cultures, their pride. The dinner table explosion is burned into 90-day history. Chairs pushed back, voices raised, accusations flying across the table like knives. And everyone watching felt the same thing: this wasn't repairable. What TLC didn't fully explain was how long that fight had been building. Years of mistrust, secret money transfers, families whispering that the other side was using their child. Every argument added another brick to a wall neither Pedro nor Chantel knew how to climb over. Social media went nuclear. Team Chantel versus Team Pedro. Entire YouTube channels dedicated to analyzing body language and tone. Fans accused producers of exploiting cultural misunderstandings for ratings. Others argued this was raw, ugly reality. But here's the devastating reveal. By the time that fight aired, the marriage was already emotionally over. What we were watching wasn't a breakdown. It was the autopsy. And then there's Big Ed. And Rose. This fight was quieter. That's why it hurt more. No screaming. No police. Just a slow realization settling into Rose's face as Ed revealed pieces of himself he had carefully hidden. The lies about his height, his past, his intentions, and then the moment that changed everything. When he asked her to take an STD test, while refusing to take one himself. The internet froze. And then it erupted. Women flooded the comments saying they felt sick watching it. Men argued he was just being practical. Rose didn't yell. She didn't throw things. She simply stood up for herself. And that was the most powerful fight of all. Because the biggest fights aren't always loud. Sometimes they're the moment someone finally chooses themselves. But here's the final layer. The one that makes all of this harder to watch in hindsight. TLC didn't invent these fights. They didn't script the pain. But they did choose what to show. And what to hide. They chose which screams made it to air and which ones stayed in the edit room. They chose when to add music. When to cut away. When to let a moment breathe. So when we talk about the biggest fights in 90-Day Fiancé history, we're really talking about the moments the mask slipped. When love stopped being a storyline and became something raw, messy, and uncomfortable. And it makes you wonder, how many fights did we never see? How many truths were edited out because they didn't fit the narrative? How many couples stayed together on camera long after the relationship had already died off screen? That's the part that keeps fans arguing years later. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. So now I want to ask you something, and really think before you answer. Which fight crossed the line for you? And more importantly, who do you think TLC protected more?